Okay, so let's set out to solve this equation two different ways. The first way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to say the following. I'm going to take a look at this angle right here, and I'm going to replace it with a generic angle. We'll call it alpha. So what I want to do is I want to solve sine of alpha is equal to -1. The substitution that I made was alpha is equal to 2 theta, which means that, okay, so this is one of them, but also it means that alpha divided by 2 is equal to theta. So the restriction here on theta for alpha would be the following. 0 is less than or equal to alpha divided by 2, which is less than or equal to 2 pi. And that, if I multiply everything by 2, I get 0 is less than or equal to alpha, which is less than or equal to 4 pi. So if you think about it, since alpha is equal to twice theta, and theta is between 0 and 2 pi, then alpha has to be between 0 and 4 pi. So what I'm going to look for here, this interval from 0 to 4 pi, I want to know, if I solve this, this says what angle or what angles give me a sine value of -1. I draw my circle out. My sine value is -1 down here. So if I look at the interval from 0 to pi over 4, let's start walking around the circle here. So starting at 0, I'll walk over and I'll keep going until I hit the spot. So this guy right here happens at 3 pi over 2. So here's 3 pi over 2. If I keep going, I've now hit 2 pi. So I'm now that I've went around once, I'm now at 2 pi, which is right there. So it's right over here in between. Now let's keep walking until we get to 4 pi. So I keep walking around, and now I hit another angle who has a sine value of -1, which is basically 3 pi over 2 plus a rotation plus 2 pi. So this angle, this is 4 pi over 2, so this is going to be 7 pi over 2. So here's 7 pi over 2 as well. So I've got two angles, it looks like, between 0 and 4 pi for alpha. So alpha would be equal to 3 pi over 2 and 7 pi over 2. But that's not what we're asked. What we want to know is what is theta. Well, alpha is equal to 2 times theta, or if I want to find theta, I just take the alpha values and divide them by 2. So theta has to be equal to each of these guys divided by 2. So 3 pi over 4 and 7 pi over 4. So if I use these two values and I plug them in, I should have solutions. So let's just check. So that says if I take the sine of 2 times 3 pi over 4, I should get -1. So this is going to be the sine of 6 pi over 4, which is the sine of 3 pi over 2, which is -1. So notice that if we work our way backward, that's how we went from 3 pi over 4 right here to 3 pi over 2. So these right here are my angles that fall between 0 and 2 pi. Now another way of thinking about this, let's go ahead and erase that. So let me just rewrite our answers up here. Okay. Excuse me. So now another way of thinking about it would be to again replace 2 theta with alpha. And so what we would say is the solutions to this right here, the generic solution, so alpha is equal to the arc sine of -1, which means alpha, without thinking about the interval, alpha would be equal to 3 pi over 2 plus 2k pi, where k is an integer. However, we let alpha equal to theta. That's this substitution right here. Which means that if I want to solve for theta, I just divide both sides by 2. So again, theta is equal to alpha over 2. So to get theta, my angles for theta should be equal to 3 pi over 2 plus 2k pi, that whole thing divided by 2. So now what we do is we think about we've got our theta, we think about it in terms of a number line. So here's 0, here's 2 pi. Now, guys, I can reduce this. We'll make this look a little bit more simple. This is 3 pi over 4 plus k pi if I divide each of these guys by 2. So now what I do is I start grabbing some k values. Now, where do you start with your k value? Well, you can start anywhere you want. It's probably easiest to try to start at 0 first. Now, but if this guy goes into the negatives, then you might have to start at like a k value of like -1 or -2. You don't have to start there, but just work your way back. So if I go k equals 0, that gives me 3 pi over 4 plus 0, which is 3 pi over 4. And that certainly falls between 0 and 2 pi, so that's going to be a solution. When k equals 1, I'd have 3 pi over 4 plus pi, which is equal to 7 pi over 4. And that falls in there. But notice if I go one more k value to 2, I'd have 3 pi over 4 plus 2 pi. And that'll give me 11 pi over 4. But 11 pi over 4 would fall out here. That's past 2 pi. So 11 pi over 4 doesn't count. Okay, because it's outside of the interval. If you go k is equal to -1, then you'd have 3 pi over 4 minus pi, which would be equal to negative pi over 4. And of course that falls outside over here. And so that can't be a solution either. And if I go any higher with the k's, past 2, I'll be too far out this way. And if I go to the left of -1, I'll also be too far out to the left. So the only values that'll work are these guys, which are what we found before. Now, another way of looking at this would be to grab your calculator. I'm going to use Maple. So as I twist this computer around here, well, actually, let's see if we can grab our calculator and see what it'll look like. Sometimes it gets finicky on here. So what I want is the sine of 2 times an angle to be equal to -1. So I'll type in sine 2x, or sine 2 theta, that's what it is. and I'll graph the line -1. So I'm graphing each side of the equation. Now my window will be between 0 and 2 pi. And let's do these by pi over 4. You can put your scale at whatever you want. And now we'll go from, let's say, -2 to 2. And if I graph it, here's the first one, and there's the second one. So where they cross are the two values that I should see over here. So to figure out where they cross, what I do is I hit second and trace, and I go down to the intersection key. And now it'll ask me to pick a curve. So notice that I'm on the sine 2 theta curve. So I'll grab that one, and it should drop me down to the second curve, which is -1. I'll hit enter, and then it'll ask me for a guess. And I'll go over to where I think they cross, and it'll give me an intersection value of 2.356. Well, to check that, let's take 3 pi and divide it by 4, and that gives me the 2.356. That was the same value that I had gotten for the cross. Now if you do it over here, you get the same value as 7 pi over 4. So we can check our solutions that we get out with our calculator.